I'm Maud Leger. I'm the chair at the Burlington Chamber of Commerce. Today, we're going to talk about staff and how to support our staff during COVID. So I'm really excited for this event. So I'll pass it on to Tanya. If you want to unmute yourself.
I'm going to unmute myself. Wow, let's try that again. Hi, everybody. Tanya here. I am the chair of the Health and Wellness Committee, and on behalf of everybody from our committee, thanks for spending your lunch hour with us. We've got two amazing speakers today. We're really excited. This is number 2 in a series of workshop wellnesses. I had this alliteration down perfectly. Now I've mixed it all up. So it's a wellness workshop on Wednesdays. So welcome everybody. Our first speaker, for those of you who didn't attend last time, so the format will be, we'll have 2 speakers and then we will have a question and answer period after each speaker. So please feel free to put your questions up in the chat and we will ask those questions. We'll have about 10 minutes with Nick and maybe 5 or 10 minutes with Chris. So hoping to do the best that we can to address all of your questions. Gonna put my glasses on so that I can read this amazing bio. Nick, I'm going to apologize in advance. It is such an incredible bio, but it was so long, I had to edit a little bit. So forgive, I hope I edited it properly. Obviously, my language skills are extraordinary this morning. So please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Nick Petrella. He is from Southern Ontario, where he was a competitive athlete in not one sport, but 3 sports, hockey, football, and lacrosse. Had several surgeries and countless concussions, which unfortunately had a devastating impact on his athletic career, both physically and emotionally, which led to a decision to no longer play competitive sports. And instead, Nick decided to focus on academics and coaching. He earned a Master of Science degree from Brock University in 2006, a focus on human performance and exercise physiology. And then he went to Western University as a PhD student, where he studied metabolism and physiology until he was offered a professor position at Mohawk College. So before completing the requirements, he decided to move to Mohawk College, hired there to assist with Mohawk's development of their health, wellness, and fitness program. And he's been employed as a professor and a coordinator ever since. He is the chair of the board for a not-for-profit agency, Fitness for Mental Health, and he is also the co-founding member of the Mohawk College Mental Health in Motion. It's a peer-to-peer support initiative. He's also been working, well, he has been working in health and fitness for over 20 years, and he's earned, okay, here it is. The credentials are amazing. Master of Science in Exercise, Physiology, and Human Performance, a Core FX Master Trainer, a Trigger Point Master Trainer, Les Mills International RPM Indoor Cycling Instructor, Registered Health and Exercise Practitioner and Health Coach. He is a 2-time recipient of Mohawk College's Instructor Appreciation Award and Everyday Hero Award. Also the recipient of the YMCA Peace Medal, and he's been awarded St. Joseph Hospital Spirit of Hope. And if that's not enough, Nick has also been selected by the Canadian Alliance on Mental Illness and Mental Health as one of the 5 faces of mental illness in Canada. Watch out for this guy. Mover and shaker, amazing. I'm so pleased that Nick is going to be our speaker today. Take it away, Nick. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen, so bear with me as I pause here. Share my screen so you don't, you're not stuck focusing on me the entire time. You get some visuals here. So you should be able to see my screen now, hopefully. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you for the thumbs up. First of all, thank you for inviting me to speak today and about such an important topic, especially given the time that we are currently facing and experiencing. And you know, the fact that our mental wellness, mental health is constantly changing, evolving from minute to minute based on where we are and what we're doing. You know, it's important to recognize that everybody's feeling a little bit differently. Everybody's coping a little bit differently. Everybody is managing the stress that we are experiencing differently. And the fact that we're all experiencing stress, I think, is one of the most important things to remember as well. And today I'm going to share my journey with mental health and resilience, and the underlying topic is going to be around mental illness and optimism. That it's not necessarily it's not necessarily a bad thing to experience mental illness, I guess, is one of the optimistic ways to say it. But that being said, you're going to see some pictures, some quotes, some statistics, just a variety of things to help kind of share my journey and hopefully complement some of the things I'm saying as I tell my story. At any point, like it was mentioned, you can put any questions in the chat, or my contact information is on every slide as well, which I encourage you to reach out if you're not comfortable asking questions in front of people. If I don't address exactly what you might be interested more in, I'm happy to chat in more detail moving forward. So that being said, let's get started. And what better to start with a picture of two of my three dogs, which I'm sure you'll hear at some point in this presentation. The joys of working from home. We always seem to get a delivery when I'm presenting and they seem to bark. So nonetheless, my journey with mental health started over 10 years ago now. And my introduction kind of explained my upbringing. I was brought up with pretty well everything I wanted and needed. I was a competitive athlete, successful athlete. I had good parents and family and friends, and I grew up really well. And I almost feel a little bit ashamed to say that sometimes, but it's the truth. But I really believe that my life started just over 10 years ago, and I had just taken the position at Mohawk College where I was, basically developing all of the health and fitness courses. And we were starting this program from scratch. So we had to literally develop all the courses and write everything out. And, I was in one of my very, very first meetings, and my associate dean at the time, we were talking about something, and there were community members there, like partners, people that were going to provide funding and support to the program, as well as a variety of colleagues from the college. And to this day, I can't remember what was said or how it was said or what came up, but I was, I became very angry and frustrated, and I shut down. And to this day, and historically throughout the 40 years of my life, when I shut down, I go very quiet. I'm physically there, but I'm not there. I have a little bit of a dissociation where my brain leaves my body, and, due to stress, my brain becomes overwhelmed with stress. It kind of just goes away and watches everything from a distance, from a safe place. So that happened in this meeting, and I didn't know it happened because that's one of the parts of dissociation. You don't really know what's happening. And whatever was said in that meeting, after the meeting, my boss, asked me to come to her office, and basically in a very, in a very polite way, she said, "You can't act like that." She said, "I know you're passionate, but you can't allow your emotion to show through. You can't allow that frustration to come out." She said it looked bad on me, and it looked bad on her, and it looked bad on the college. And she said, if it happens again, there might have to be some disciplinary action taken. And after that meeting, I remember not even knowing what was happening. And I got angry and frustrated, and I wasn't sure what to do. So I went to my best friend, who was a colleague at the college, and asked her what to do. I said, "This just happened. What do I do?" And I had left my PhD. I wasn't, in school anymore, and I had put all my eggs in one basket, so to speak, right? So I asked her what to do, and she said, "Well, why don't you see a counselor or a therapist or somebody that might be able to help?" I've always been moody, cranky, miserable. I've had ups and downs. The best way to describe my mood for my entire life has been unpredictable. I could literally shift on, the drop of a dime. And I could go from really happy to really angry really quickly, or really sad really quickly. And again, I would just withdraw. And I remember she suggested a therapist, and 10, 12 years ago, therapy was not as well recognized or accepted, let's say, as it is now, right? And I remember looking back at her, and I said, "I'm not crazy. I don't need a therapist. I just need to figure this out." And we went back and forth, and she was very supportive and persistent. And at one point, I finally realized, what's the worst that can happen? I'm not too proud to learn. So I'll go to therapy. And I booked an appointment with a therapist. And I think I booked 4 appointments to start. And it was the middle of my 3rd appointment, where I was diagnosed with severe depression and severe anxiety. And I remember in that moment when she said that, I had no idea what the heck that was, no clue what depression or anxiety was. And I remember the one thing I do remember is I remember that sounded bad. So I stormed out of her office. I stormed out of the appointment and I drove home. I was living in London at the time and my appointment was in Hamilton, mainly because I didn't want people to see me going to therapy. So I went to Hamilton for therapy as opposed to London. And I remember driving home and I was angry, but I didn't even know why I was angry because I didn't know what it was. So I went home and I did what most people do nowadays. I Googled anxiety and depression. And 12 years ago, the results aren't as supportive and positive as they are now. You know, I was reading things like, you're never going to be able to have a job. You're never going to be able to maintain a relationship. You'll probably end up in jail. You know, those were the types of things that were associated with mental illness, you know, a number of years ago. So rather than feel better, rather than feel good about where I was, I started to spiral and I started to sink. And I went into this incredible spiral of shame and guilt and disgust. And I literally, helplessness and hopelessness, I literally felt like, you know, my life was over. And I stopped talking to people. I stopped associating with friends and family. You know, I was married at the time, which I'm now divorced from that marriage. My wife had an idea what was going on, but she really didn't, I guess I could say. And I literally just hid. I would go to work, I would teach my classes, I would do my job, not to the best of my ability, but I would do enough to get by. And you know, I would still exercise because that was one thing. I was very materialistic. I thought I had to maintain this image. You know, so I was still taking care of myself physically, but I literally would just cry for hours on end because I didn't know what else to do. And, you know, for the next 5 years of my life from that day of diagnosis, I literally struggled every minute of every day trying to find reasons not to kill myself. And I was in and out of this kind of, you know, this shame. You know, it made me less of a person. It made me less of a professor. It made me less of a man. It made me less of a son, you know, less of a husband, less of a nephew, all of these things, right? I just thought it took away from who I was. And I was constantly battling and fighting just to keep my head afloat. And I always use the analogy, and I know in the virtual world, these kind of analogies, these, you know, this interactive presentation doesn't always work, but, you know, I always ask the question, how many people here have ever been swimming in a pool or an ocean or a lake or a river or a pond for that matter, and you can't touch the bottom? And when you can't touch the bottom, one of the things you have to do in order to keep your head afloat is you have to tread water. And if you stop treading water, you're going to sink and you're going to drown. Now imagine this, imagine treading water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, because that's the emotional and physical exhaustion that mental illness takes on people. And I tell you that not to feel sorry for me, but to gain understanding of what some of the people that maybe you work alongside or people in your lives that they're experiencing literally on a day-to-day basis. A little side note here, I was doing a presentation at a school, elementary school, to grade 7s and 8s, and I asked the question, you know, what do you do if you can't touch the bottom of the pool and you're swimming? And a little boy raised his hand and he said, well, you float. And I said, no, you can't float because that ruins my story. So you can't float, you have to tread water. So on, we continue, right? So I was literally breaking down both physically and emotionally. I was still exercising. You know, I was going to the gym every day because that was the one thing that I found was probably making me feel a little bit better. But my body was breaking down. There were days where I couldn't get out of bed. And it's not because I didn't want to get out of bed, because I was either too sad or too, you know, afraid or anything like that. It was because I couldn't lift my head off the pillow because I was in so much pain. You know, my ex-wife literally was lifting me out of bed some days so I could stand. I was going to physiotherapists, chiropractors, athletic therapists, whoever would see me to look at my spine to figure out what the heck was going on because I was in so much pain all the time. I was almost at a point where they were sending me to surgeons where they wanted to talk about exploratory surgery to see what was going on. In hindsight, looking back and speaking with my current therapist, it was very much just a result of the emotional stress I was under. And that's an important association to make because you can't have physical health without mental health, and you can't have mental health without physical health. And the dissociation or the separation that we create between physical health and mental health doesn't exist. They go hand in hand. And the longer you leave one untreated, you're likely going to experience a negative impact on the other. And my emotional health was causing all of this pain in my body, and my body was breaking down. You heard in my introduction that I've had many surgeries, many broken bones, torn muscles. And likely that was a result of the fact that I've had depression and anxiety my whole life. I didn't know any different. You know, when I was in high school, I thought everybody wanted to kill themselves. I thought everybody thought about suicide the way I did. I didn't know that that wasn't something that people did, that they didn't think about. I just assumed everybody did. You know, as a child, I had anxiety and panic attacks all the time. We had no idea what it was when I was, 4, 5, 6 years old. We had no idea what it was. You know, I went to every gastrointestinal specialist in Southern Ontario that would see me because I had so much stomach pain. Now we know that's a result of anxiety. But I've likely had these different illnesses my whole life. It's just that when I turned 30 years old, which is when our brain actually reaches full maturity for a male, females, it's 25. So that's why females are always more intuitive and smarter than us males. But the truth is, my brain reached this full maturity, and the chemical imbalance that was created in my brain just took off. And then I obviously have experienced different traumas that have contributed to this. But ultimately, I was battling, I was battling this depression and anxiety and didn't know where to go. I saw probably a dozen or more therapists over this 5-year period where I was battling suicide and survived a couple of suicide attempts. I had a couple of therapists tell me I was broken. Actually, the therapist that diagnosed me told me I was broken and she didn't know what to do with me anymore. I had therapists not see me anymore because they didn't think I was helpable. You know, they weren't going to be able to help me. I had therapists tell me that they didn't have the time to help me. I had therapists that would see me and then just stop calling me back too. So I was trying to find help. I wasn't satisfied with where I was, but the fact of the matter was I couldn't find the right therapist. And at one point, and not at one point, I had reached a point where I'd given up. I had literally stopped caring anymore. I didn't want I didn't want help anymore. I was broken. I had so many people tell me I was broken. I was believing it. And I was in a really bad place. And I remember I was driving around this day and the same best friend that recommended therapy in the first place, she had an idea of what was going on, but nobody really understood. It's because I was hiding it, not because people weren't trying to. I was hiding. I literally was wearing as many different masks as I could day to day in order to pretend that I was okay. I was driving around one day and I felt broken and I was in a really bad place because when I wasn't well, I would just go and drive with no destination. And my friend called me and she said, what are you doing? And I said, just out for a drive. And she said, where are you going? And I said, I don't know. And I wasn't going anywhere good, that's for sure. And I remember she said, well, when's your next therapy appointment? And I think her intuition probably read into the fact that I wasn't well. And I said, well, I'm done with therapy. I'm not going back. And, we went, had a conversation about it. And she said, listen, she said, I'm not going to stop calling and texting you until you prove that you've made another therapy appointment. And I said, oh, okay, whatever. I kind of played it off, blew it off like, yeah, she's not going to do that. But she did. She kept calling and texting. And I remember I got home and I went on my computer. And if you actually went on your computer right now and Googled therapists in Burlington, Ontario, for example, one of probably the third search result that pops up is going to be from Psychology Today. And that link is going to take you to a list of therapists in your area. So that's what I did. I Googled therapists in London, Ontario at the time. And I was scrolling through this list of therapists and I have no idea what I was looking for. I was looking at photos of people and trying to decide whether I thought they could help me or not. And I remember seeing a picture of a woman that I thought looked like a nice person. And I clicked on her link and I sent her an email. And she replied fairly quickly and I set up an appointment. She had one spot left and I happened to be the person that was lucky enough to get it. And I remember going into my first appointment with her and, I walked into her office expecting nothing. And I ended up leaving her office for the first time in my life, feeling just a little bit better about who I was, just a little bit better about where I was. And we actually agreed to disagree that possibly, that just maybe I can't control the anxiety and the depression, but maybe I can manage it. And maybe she can help me manage it. And, that was probably 7, 8 years ago now. And I still see that therapist to this day. And the reason I tell you that story is because therapy is very much like a marriage. It's very much like a relationship. You generally don't marry the first person that you date. You generally don't date the first person that you have feelings for. You have to find the person that you build rapport with, that you feel like you can trust, that you click with, because you're sharing those deepest and darkest secrets. You can't just do that with anybody. And for the last 7 or 8 years, I believe that's when my recovery journey has started and kind of continues. a couple of years ago, so, you know, I have two daughters now. We have two daughters. We have a 4-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old daughter. And a couple of years ago, you know, my wife gave birth, so over 2 years ago now, my wife gave birth to our second daughter. And I had stopped going to therapy for a while at that point. I had stopped seeing my therapist because I thought I had things under control. You know, I thought I was in a good place. I thought I was controlling my anxiety and depression. And I hit rock bottom. I had a huge relapse. I hit rock bottom again where I was lying to everybody. You know, I hurt all of my friends and my family. You know, I devastated my wife, and I'm lucky enough to say that she stuck through a lot with me and continues to from day to day. But I thought I was controlling my depression and anxiety, but in fact, it had the biggest grip on me it ever had. It was lying to me. It was telling me things that weren't true. And that's honestly what mental illness does to people. It makes you believe things that aren't true. It tells you things that aren't true. And honestly, you believe it. You don't know any different. I always use the analogy like a GPS. Your brain is like a GPS. Now, I don't know if you ever have, but I have personally. Imagine you punch an address into your GPS, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but sometimes it takes you to a place that you have that you weren't supposed to be. You know, it's a dead end, or you end up at a roadblock, or the roads don't connect anymore, or something like that, right? Well, your mind, our brain is kind of like a GPS in a lot of ways. And with depression, anxiety, you know, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, any mental health problem or mental illness, what happens is, you know, you don't always get the right response or the right reaction or the right decision. And that continues to happen over and over again. And that's part of what recovery is. Recovery is this process of being self-aware, this process of realizing that you can't do things alone, this process of understanding that you need help from others, this process of finding what works for you. And the hardest part, the most challenging part about that is that you make so many mistakes trying to find what works. And you live through so many challenges because you often don't make the best choices or know how to manage things the proper way, not even the proper way, but an appropriate way. And then you have to learn from that mistake. You know, I've been doing these presentations now for a number of years, probably 7 years or something like that. And, you know, I remember I was in a good place with therapy. You know, I was seeing my current therapist, and I was feeling better. I was starting to open up a little more about what was going on. I didn't share my struggles with suicide with anybody up until a couple of years ago, to be honest with you. I hid those from everybody, even my therapist. You know, I remember the first time I saw my therapist after my relapse a couple of years ago, I told her, and I don't know if my wife brought it up or I did, but I brought up my struggles with suicide and that I wasn't well. And I apologize if I get a little emotional because I still get very emotional telling this part of the story. But I remember, you know, sharing that with my therapist, and she said, "Nick, you never told me." She said, "You never told me any of that." And I said, "I know." I said, "I was ashamed of it. I thought that they would take my job away, you know, that they would, I'd get fired, or I would, you know, I would lose my kids or my dogs or something like that, right?" So I was I still have this self-stigma around my own mental illness, even though I share every vulnerability that I experience in my life. That being said, you know, I was starting to open up, and my best friend at the college, same person. There's a theme here if you haven't figured it out. My best friend at the college teaches a class around wellness, and she knew I was going to therapy. She knew I was starting to feel better, you know, and she was doing a class around mental health and asked me to come in and speak on it. And I remember, again, my reaction, my instinctual reaction was, hell no, I'm not coming in and talking about that. People will see right through me. They'll see that I'm crazy. They'll see that I have these, you know, these problems. So we went back and forth again, and finally I decided to come in, or I went into her class, and I talked about mental health. And for about 2 hours, 90 minutes probably, I literally cried in front of a group of my students for that period of time, because it was the first time that I had openly shared my struggle. And I remember at the end of that presentation, same thoughts come in. I don't know if I'm going to get fired. I don't know if security is going to come in and rush me out. But one by one, students started to thank me and started to you know, just want to stand with me. You know, some of them didn't have anything to say. They just wanted to be closer to me. And that was the first time in my life that I realized the importance of being vulnerable and the importance of being honest and being open with everybody, and not maybe accepting who I was, accepting what I was, and accepting that maybe that I have depression, maybe that I have anxiety. I also have panic attacks. I also live with post-traumatic stress disorder. The fact that I have all of these things, that's not who I am. You know, who I am is, you know, a father, a husband. Those are my priorities. A mentor, somebody that, you know, a mental health ally, somebody that anybody that hears me speak knows that they can send me an email and I'm going to reply and say, let's talk, you know, let's have a conversation about it. Let's figure this out. And I realized at that point that that's what I was, you know, that's who I was. That was the empowerment that I was experiencing was what I needed. And it was 2 days after that where one of the students in that classroom sent me an email and basically said, you know, I'm not coming to class anymore. I just wanted to let you know. And I remember, you know, I'm sure you get these emails and text messages where you can't read tone, but there is tone in email and text messages, as we all know, right? So I read this email and it just didn't sit well with me. And I replied right away. And it turns out his email was his suicide letter and he was saying goodbye. The good news is we exchanged emails for the next 4 hours and we met on campus the next day and we talked about what was going on. And ultimately what he needed to hear in that moment, what he needed to know was that somebody cared. He needed to hear me tell him, I care enough that I'm going to be there tomorrow and we're going to figure this out together. And I don't even know what that means. I don't know what figuring it out is going to look like. I don't know what that's going to feel like, but I'm going to help you in any way I can. And that ultimately saved his life. And I tell you that story because each one of you, each one of us has the power and the ability to save a life every day. You don't even realize it, but by simply telling somebody that you care, by simply asking a question, like, you don't seem well, are you okay? Or you seem overwhelmed, do you want to talk about it? Not accepting the fact that when somebody says, you know what, I'm fine, I'll figure it out. Not accepting that as they're fine. Because we all know that when we're in our worst mood, when we're having a bad day, very rarely are we going to tell an associate, a friend, a colleague that we're having a bad day. Our general response is either we're not going to say anything, or when somebody passes you in, or calls you or texts you and says, hey, how are you? You say, yeah, I'm fine. Don't accept that, because fine means that you're not fine. You know, and I'll tell you another story to kind of emphasize my point. I've been doing a lot of, I do a lot of presentations with the Canadian Mental Health Association. One of my friends, colleagues has now become one of my best friends, Jill Dennison, who works for CMHA Hamilton. And, you know, we were doing a presentation and this was a number of years ago and I was in the middle of a divorce and I literally hadn't slept in probably, gosh, I don't know, maybe 5 days, like haven't slept. There was nothing wrong with my divorce. It was amicable, but it was stressful for me. And, you know, I gave the presentation. I remember walking out of the presentation with her and she said, you know, how are you? And I said, I'm fine, because that's what we say, right? We're fine. I said, I'm fine. And she grabbed me on the shoulder, and I always get a little teary-eyed because this really, you know, it's one of those life-saving moments for me. She turned me around and she said, you know, how are you? Really? How are you? And I just started crying because she made eye contact with me and connected with me. And I just couldn't hold it back. And I said, I'm not good. And she said, I know. She said, I know. Why didn't you tell me? I said, because I don't want to bother you. And her response was a little bit of humor, but she said, you know, this is what I do for a living. How could you not want to bother me, first of all? And second of all, I'm your friend. And, you know, it was one of those moments where I realized the importance of not accepting the answer of fine, first of all. And second of all, asking more questions. The importance of asking a question. Like, what's going on? Tell me about it. You know, let's talk about it, right? And then the importance of being honest and letting it out. Because those emotions, those feelings that we hold in for an extended period of time, those emotions that we don't give attention to, the emotions that we tend to suppress and hide, those negative ones, all they do is they grow. Every day that passes, every minute that passes, we feed that negative energy and eventually it's got to come out. It doesn't have anywhere else to go. It's got to come out, and it's either going to come out in physical illness or emotional illness. We know that it's likely that 1 in 3 people will experience a mental illness at some point in their lifetime. Close to 34% of the population. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter where you work. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter who your family is. That doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter how much you take care of yourself. It happens. And that means it's going to happen to somebody really close to you. So the fact that we have to be more empathetic, more compassionate, ask questions, listen without the intention of, listen with the intention of understanding, listen without the intention of speaking, listening to listen, not to talk. and that's something that we can do better and do more of on a day-to-day basis that we can't do enough of, for that matter. Imagine it was your best friend. Imagine it was your partner or your husband or your wife or if you have children, imagine it was your child. Imagine that was your son or your daughter, that is struggling with suicide. And imagine not asking those questions. 90% of suicides, 9 out of 10 suicides are preventable. And they're preventable by asking questions. They're preventable by showing people that we care, by making mental health, mental illness, making it normal, because it is normal. It is normal. Imagine, you have friends that live with cancer or live with diabetes. That's normal. Years ago, cancer used to be something nobody talked about because if you had cancer, you're going to die, right? And now cancer is one of the most mainstream illnesses that we talk about on a daily basis because we know how prevalent it actually is. Mental illness is very similar. It's going to affect a lot of people. So we have to create this open, inclusive, accepting environment where it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to have bad days. It's okay to have bad moments. It's okay to take a day for yourself. It's okay to take a mental health day. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's something we need to be more considerate of as well. When the pandemic started, obviously we were under an extreme amount of stress and uncertainty, and here we are over a year later, right? That being said, I was talking to a colleague who works in the mental health field, and we were talking about, the amount of stress we're under of just not knowing. Kids are at home, businesses are shuttered. Maybe you're still working, but you're expected to get things done from home. And we were talking about the stress that was experiencing and that we're probably still experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And she had recently read a paper that had just come out, and it was about the idea that, we should possibly be reducing our standard of what success actually is. And the acceptable amount of work that we were accomplishing at that point, she said, if you're doing 30% of what you did on a daily basis prior to the pandemic, then you are a hell of a lot more successful than you give yourself credit for. So give ourselves a break just as much, and give ourselves the opportunity to recover and take care of ourselves, to take care of other people. I do these presentations for a couple of different reasons. One, because I want to create the awareness. Two, because it's a little bit selfish and it's therapeutic for me to actually share with other people. And three, because I want people to start asking questions. I want, and I'm going to apply this to you if you're a business owner or a manager or an employer. Your employees, you're stressed out just as much as they are. You can't take care of them if you don't take care of yourself first. You have to take care of yourself just as much as you take care of them. Because it's just like an airplane, right? You go on an airplane, which I'm sure many of us haven't been on in a significant period of time. That being said, when the flight attendant does their safety spiel at the start, one of the things about when the oxygen mask falls from the ceiling, you have to put it on yourself before you put it on other people first. Because if you don't put it on yourself first, you're no good to us if you're unconscious because you don't have enough oxygen. And that's how we have to look at ourselves day in and day out. Every time that you give something to somebody else, every time that you offer help to somebody else, every time that you offer, a listening ear, you're losing some of your oxygen. So you have to replace that somehow. Think about that oxygen tank on your back right now. How full is it? How full is it? And I don't know, it could be different for everybody, which it is, but have you done anything to refill your oxygen tank lately? So that makes you a better manager or boss or employee or employer for that matter, right? And that's how we have to look at things as well. I am going to stop speaking soon and allow any questions that come up. I love answering questions because that helps me understand more about what you want to learn more about. But I do like to share one part of the story as well. That best friend that I keep talking about, the one that has been there for me and continues to be there for me, we've been married now for 3 years. And we have 2 young daughters together, and we built our relationship off of our marriage, off of a life, off of supporting each other and growing together and doing creating this journey together. Sometimes there's something called communication bias or listening communication bias, where when the people, we tend to predict everything the people that are closest to us are going to say. So we don't listen. We don't listen because we feel like we don't have to, because we know what they're going to say. And I'm only bringing that up because the important part to remember is that listening to the people closest to us is the most important piece of listening we can do. Nobody teaches us how to listen, right? That's something that we have to learn how to do, and we can keep learning how to do. So my wife and I have created this we're doing a presentation on this, the importance of peer support and spousal support in this case. We've created this life that we recognize that mental illness is going to be a part of our lives for the rest of our lives, and our daughters may experience some form of mental illness as well. I believe our 4-year-old has a severe case of anxiety that we're going to have to manage our whole life. And I'm okay sharing that because we're making that part of our life. Now, I am going to give you a little bit of homework before I stop talking, and maybe that's the professor in me, but my homework to you today is you all know someone that is close to you right now that is stressed, overwhelmed, struggling. Your homework is to simply send them a text or an email or give them a phone call or a FaceTime or video chat or whatever, and just say, I was just thinking about you and wanted to know if you wanted to chat, because you have no idea how much that's going to mean to that person. And I bet you of the 39 of you, aside from me, 40, so there's 40 of us, 39 of you, of the 39 of you, I guarantee that one of you is going to save a life and you're not even going to know it, because nobody's going to tell you that. But you will save their life by simply reaching out and saying, I was just thinking about you, wondering how you're doing, and wondered if you needed anything. Literally, that's all it takes to save a life. And the last piece of homework I'm going to give you is to share something about this presentation today. And this last slide here is so cliche, but it's so true. I don't think I know any of you on this call. I didn't really get to see everybody, but I don't think I know any of you personally. And I would do anything to help any one of you at any point. I would do anything to help you find the right help, because people care and people will help. And with the right help, with the right support, with the right professional help, recovery is possible for anybody. It really is. I did it. I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky to have the right person, my wife, in my corner to help me along the way. But if I can do it, I believe anybody can. And I'm going to encourage you to do the same. So that being said, I am going to stop speaking and stop sharing my screen. I know there are some resources that will be shared at the end. I have a list of resources that I'm happy to share with you at any point as well. Bounce Back, which is one that's put on by the Canadian Mental Health Association, which is awesome. Check out Bounce Back. It's specifically for people in Ontario. And then obviously there's a list of resources. These are more local in terms of Hamilton resources, but anything in addition, please don't hesitate to reach out at any point, and I'd be happy to help in any way I can. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you for your attention. I obviously can't see you. I wish I could, but thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share with you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Wow, brilliant. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for sharing your story. There are so many great points there. I love how you talk as well about finding the right therapist. It's kind of like finding, the right person to marry. I mean, it's not necessarily the first therapist that you meet that you're going to connect with. Just quickly, because we don't have a lot of time before we move over to Chris, and I'll invite anybody, if you do have a question, please throw it in the chat right now. But I'm kind of curious. So if I'm in a work environment and, maybe I'm fairly new, maybe there's a lot of people there, but I can sort of sense that, there's something going on with one of my coworkers. How do you recommend that, as a coworker or maybe even as a boss, how do we approach people that we think are having a hard time, that are really hurting?
That's a great question. And we teach these skills in mental health first aid is one of the courses that I'm an instructor for, and a very powerful course because it teaches us how to have these difficult conversations. Because one of the most difficult questions I've ever had to ask somebody is whether they're thinking of killing themselves or taking their lives by suicide. Hardest question I still have to ask people to this day, but the most important one. So when you recognize that somebody is not well, or maybe it seems not well, best question you can ask is, are you okay? Is there something going on? Are you okay? And if they say, yeah, I'm okay. And then you can say, are you sure? Because I noticed that you've been showing up late for work lately, or you haven't been attending meetings, or you've been quieter lately, or, the last time we were supposed to meet, you keep canceling on me. So pointing out, or not, I don't want to say pointing out because you don't want to be accusational, but pointing out a behavior that you noticed that they might not even realize is something going on, right? They might not even realize that they've canceled the last 5 meetings with you, but helping them recognize that maybe something going on is part of it as well. And then from there, it becomes a fluid conversation of, I'm only here, I'm only asking because I care. And anytime you get into these conversations, You can't give advice. The worst thing you can do is say, yeah, you know what, just go for a walk and you'll feel better. That's not going to work, because as soon as you offer advice to them, that devalues their feeling. It makes them feel like their emotions aren't normal, because you don't know what it's like. Empathy is a really important word, and we keep using the word empathy, but I think empathy is the most misunderstood word in the world as well, because empathy isn't walking a mile in somebody else's shoes, because walking a mile in somebody else's shoes is impossible, right? You can walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, but you have no idea how that mile felt for them. So you have to ask them the question of, you know, maybe their shoes were too small. Maybe their shoes give them blisters. Maybe, you know, all of these different things that we don't think about. You can't assume you know how somebody's feeling. So you have to ask. You have to ask how they're feeling and try to understand where that feeling's coming from. And one of the most important pieces of advice I can give you is, if you're in a conversation with somebody, don't expect to have the answer. And if there's nothing wrong with saying, and I say this almost every week to somebody, I don't even know what to say. I don't even have an answer. I want to be here for you if I can. And it's okay to not know what to say, because you've never been in their shoes before. So to give advice would mean that their problem isn't a problem, right? So my suggestion is to ask those questions of, are you okay? Because, and I'm only asking because I care. And then when people resist help, because you are going to experience this at some point too, they're going to resist help. That's when you have to literally turn the script and be like, what if it was reversed? What if I was the one that was feeling this way? What if I was the one that wasn't showing up to meetings? What if I was the one that, you know, is at risk of losing my job? Wouldn't you want to help me? And the answer is probably going to be, yeah, of course I'd want to help you. And then you can flip it back and say, well, that's what I'm trying to do here. I just want to help. And then whatever it takes, I'm here to help. And that's the part that we have to remember too. Sometimes being the support person, again, you empty your oxygen tank really quickly. It's exhausting. It's fatiguing. It takes a lot out of you. So you can't do it alone. You have to engage people and create almost like a circle of support for somebody, a shield of support for somebody, so that there's multiple people that are able to assist that person, because you can't do it alone. It's hard enough for somebody to ask for help. So sometimes as a support person, you have to engage others for support, and that adds more value. Long answer to that question. Sorry about that.
A great answer though. Perfect answer. Really all about listening and empathy. We have 2 minutes left. I'm just curious if you could touch on, or maybe even send us some information when you talk about your mental health first aid course. That sounds like something everybody should take.
Yeah, and actually I just did a week-long series of presentations around this for entrepreneurs. The idea is trying to make mental health first aid, create more awareness around it. So it's a 2-day course. So just to give you a quick overview, it's a 2-day course, 12 hours total. Generally, the 12 hours have to be completed within 2 weeks, because it's best obviously to keep it fresh in your mind. You need a minimum of 8 people to run the course, but generally what it touches on is signs and symptoms of the common mental illnesses that people experience. And then the most important part is assessing risk risk of suicide and harm. Then we get into listening skills, and then how to have those difficult conversations. But it's all about creating awareness, and not only creating that awareness, but teaching people how to have those difficult conversations, because they are challenging. But they're generally mental health first aid trainers or instructors like myself. We are independent contractors, so we are all employed by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. But that being said, we all operate independently. So there's definitely mental health first aid instructors all over Hamilton, Burlington. But if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, like I said, I can flip you a link to the website to give you more information. And I'm happy to chat or answer any questions about that specifically as well. Thanks for asking.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks. Yes, I think we would love that. Thank you so very much. And we will move on to our next speaker now. Chris Bergs has been practicing exclusively in the area of employment and labor law since 2008, and he's very well versed in the legal issues affecting today's Ontario workplace. He works closely with employers to help them manage their employees in a way that achieves business objectives while avoiding legal problems. If issues do become contentious, Chris is a creative negotiator and a tireless advocate, and we're really excited to have Chris as our second speaker tonight. Thank you. This afternoon, not tonight.
It's not quite that late, right?
Oh yes, oh yes. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And thanks to Nick for sharing his story. You made the big bad lawyer a little bit misty at times, but I've recomposed myself and we're good to go. But no, seriously, that was quite helpful, I think, to everybody. To shift gears, unfortunately, a little bit, where the rubber meets the road legally, we're not talking so much about necessarily interpersonal interactions and helping people and so on a personal level. But of course, that's all good. That's all things we should be doing, hopefully. But a lot of times we run into a situation where we need to know where the line is legally, right? And just the standard disclaimer that if I'd put a PowerPoint together would have been my first slide. This talk is intended for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice or an opinion on any issue, but we'd be pleased to assist you with any specific situation. All right, end of disclaimer. So really, basically the law that we bump into the most when it comes to mental health in the workplace is the Human Rights Code. So the Human Rights Code is a law from the Ontario legislature, and every province has one, and so do the feds for the workplaces and so on that they regulate, like banks and airlines. And basically, it says don't discriminate against people in certain areas of life, like housing and employment and a few others, based on any one of 16 enumerated grounds, like age, race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, that sort of thing. There's 16 of them. But one of the 16 is disability, and disability encompasses just about anything that might be affecting a person that's more serious or more permanent than a cold or the flu, basically. All right, so any physical impairment, any disease, any mental illness, any disfigurement or that sort of thing, injuries, that type of thing. And so you're not to discriminate in employment against someone based on any one of those things. And so what does that mean? Well, you don't refuse to hire someone because they have a mental illness, if otherwise they're the right person for the job, right? You don't discipline people because of their mental illness. You don't fire people because of their mental illness. But those are the basic ones that probably come to mind when you think about discrimination. But the more complicated one that especially comes up with mental illness is the idea of accommodation. Okay, so under the Human Rights Code, you have to accommodate people's disability or other human rights related needs, such as perhaps needing a different day off or a different religious holiday based on religion. But you have to, it mostly comes up with disability. And so you have to accommodate those needs up to the point of undue hardship. And that means adjusting the work or adjusting the way things are done so that that person can contribute despite their disability, right? So an easy example is, say somebody has a back issue, just starting with the physical. It's usually a bit easier to talk about than the mental. But say somebody has a job where they occasionally have to lift something heavy, but they now have a back issue and they can't lift something heavy. So what do? Well, you accommodate it by moving that heavy lifting off to other people. So instead of Bob lifting something 3 times a day, maybe Jim, Susie, and Robert, I know that's also the same as Bob, but anyway, both lift one 50-pound thing per day, right? The work is redistributed, and it's certainly not a hardship on the employer to do that. Now, if Bob's entire job was lifting 50-pound things, we might be having a different conversation, right? He can no longer do the essential parts of his job. But there's also ways around that. Perhaps if there's another job opening, we look at that for Bob and so on. So with mental health, though, it gets a little more complicated on one hand. Another way, it's fairly simple. Sort of the #1 accommodation that I see as a lawyer helping employers, and I also work for employees as well, but I've got my employer hat on right now because I think most people sitting here are employers. The #1 accommodation that I see coming up for mental health related issues is basically time off work, right? Sometimes there's a middle ground of they need, partial hours or something like that to be able to cope. But we usually see that on the way back into the workplace after time off. They're off for a while, then they come back at halftime, 3/4, and so on, right? So basically that tends to be your basic accommodation. And so how does that work? Well, normally someone would provide some sort of medical note saying some sort of treating medical professional thinks they need time off work for medical reasons. And just so you know, most of the time, like 95% of the time, employers do not have a right to the diagnosis. Okay, going back to the back scenario, you don't need to know that Bob has a pulled muscle or degenerative disc disease or bone cancer in his spine or anything else. You just need to know he can't lift 50 pounds right now. So similarly with mental health, you just need to know that he can't be at work right now. Or perhaps if there's some accommodations that could be worked out while still working, you need to know he has trouble multitasking, or he gets headaches from reading, or things like that. So we basically, as the employer, once we get these limitations from a doctor, but not a diagnosis, but what the functional impacts are, then we have an obligation to try to accommodate their work so they can continue providing work and continue earning money. Okay, and we do that up to the point of undue hardship, which is a pretty high hurdle, which we won't get into all the details of that right now, but we do have to work pretty hard to make it work. But again, for a lot of people with mental health issues, all we have to do is give them time off work while they seek treatment, while they decompress, while they, get better, basically, or better enough to come back to work. And then perhaps we adjust things on the way back in. That's typically how it works. And basically, once we do that, then there's a few implications. The sort of colder, more vulgar financial parts of it. If someone is off work due to a disability, do we have to continue paying them? No, we don't, right? It's clear under human rights legislation and the case law they're under, including a case from the Ontario Court of Appeal a couple of decades ago, you don't have to pay if there isn't work, right? You're paying for work, that's the fundamental deal. Now, there's various ways people can still get paid. There could be short-term disability insurance at the employer, long-term disability insurance. If those aren't there, you might use up banked vacation, or there is also a sort of a last resort, there's employment insurance sickness benefits that run for about 4 months. So there are some options there. Of course, you don't have to not pay them if you'd rather pay them for some of their time off, but there's no legal obligation if there's no work being provided. So you put someone off on a leave because that's what they've requested. Maybe they've got LTD, maybe they don't, but they're out of the workplace. So in terms of obligations as an employer, a lot of people ask, well, how long do I have to keep their job? Well, basically, you have to keep that job open because really that's all you're doing. You're not paying them, they're not working. The least you can do is hold their job, basically, legally, right? So you as an employer have to do what you need to do to get the work done while they're off. That may mean hiring somebody in the interim. And yes, you'll have to get rid of that person when the other person comes back if there's no room for the two of them, right? You do have this obligation to let them take this leave and let them come back to a job when they're able. Now, there are points where the relationship legally is shown to have broken down, usually around, say, 2 years off work. And if the medical evidence is such that it looks like they're not going to be able to come back, even if you change the job to accommodate them, then legally we're at what they call the frustration point. The employment contract is frustrated. If it looks like they can't come back, then the foundation of the employment is no longer there. And so you can essentially take them off the books. You pay them their minimum employment standards termination entitlements, not the full common law severance entitlements that you may have seen certain lawyers talking about on certain Saturday morning television shows, but just the basic ESA provisions, and then they're off the books. And you're also off the hook in terms of human rights legislation as well. That's been clear in the Supreme Court of Canada's case law for at least a decade or two now. But that's well down the road. And hopefully people do recover and they do come back to work, and we treat them humanely and work with them to make sure that they can provide productive work for the business, and we can provide them an income and they can feel contributory and so on. And hopefully, if people are trained in the way Nick is talking, we'll be able to support people and so on. And that's basically how it works.
Okay, that ended really quick. I thought there would be a little bit more that you'd want to add on to that. It was
well,
very.
If there's any questions, we can fill in.
Yeah, perfect. I'm sure there's probably quite a few questions. I'm not sure if anybody has anything in the chat that they would like to add. If there were any questions in particular, Your website is also there for anybody who would perhaps like to, you know, talk to Christopher afterwards. Thank you so much. It's incredibly clear and concise and very informative for us and for our members. So at this point, I don't really see any questions. So I think that
we've got one actually.
where do you see that? I do not see that.
Let's see. Kara says, oh, it's direct to me. Can you share how long typically an employer has to wait until they hire a replacement on a short-term basis? All right. No, I don't. Never used chat on Zoom before. That's good. So basically, the length of time doesn't really matter. You need to do whatever you need to do to keep your business running, right? The only issue is what happens when they come back, right? So you need to be able to swap them back in when they're willing to come back, or willing and able, according to their medical professionals, to come back. So there's no real hard and fast rule. I mean, if they said, I need a few days off, and you hire someone to replace them and they find out about it, they might be quite upset. And that may give you some practical problems. But if you need the work done and they're not able to do the work, you can certainly slot someone else in. You've just got to be ready to pull that person back out.
Super. And I've got one other question. Can an employer ask an employee to come back to work in the office if working from home is not actually working?
Right. And I assume they mean sort of the COVID related working from home.
That's kind of what I'm guessing as well. Yeah.
Okay. So yes, you know, the government is telling us we're supposed to be having people working from home if it's at all possible, right? Not sure quite about the ins and outs of the enforcement of that, but that is the advice at least, and perhaps some sort of legally binding requirement from the government. So first of all, you need to be pretty clear in terms of why it's not working, I would think. But from an occupational health and safety idea, I mean, we do have to take all reasonable steps to protect the health and safety of workers, right? And so with COVID-19, we would have to at least be following all the procedures the government is asking for, and probably, if we're being careful, other ones as well. And we would have the right to demand someone come to work if we are complying with all those things. Now, they may bring up sort of a mental health issue, that they're suffering a lot of anxiety about this and so on. And again, if that's somehow diagnosable, then we'd also have to be looking at that and accommodating it and so on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christopher. I think our time, we've got 2 minutes left. We like to sort of keep it to your lunch hour in that 1 hour. Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Nick. Very moving talk from Nick, very informative from Christopher. Absolutely delighted that you could take some time to speak with us today.